Welcome everyone to the second round of the Grand Chess Tour here, Superbet Chess Classic in Romania. We have Nodirbek Abdusattorov with the white pieces opening the game with 1e4 against Gukesh. What a game this is going to be between two players who are rivals of each other, very talented, and Gukesh has already become the world champion. Maybe Nodirbek will someday fight for the ultimate crown against Gukesh. Knight comes out to f3, attacking the pawn on e5. And Gukesh responds back with knight to c6. What will Nodirbek choose now as an opening? Rui Lopez or Italian? These are the two main lines played at the top level. He goes for the Italian, puts his bishop on this beautiful long diagonal here. And Gukesh, I think, responds back. Yes, he will respond with the symmetrical bishop c5 played here. One difference that exists in the Italian position, if you notice closely, is how the knight on c6 is already placed here, while white's pawn is free to move ahead. So white is not going to commit his knight to c3. Bishop g5 immediately played like a tracer bullet there. It's not the main move. You go c3, you go sometimes h3, you go castles. These are the main possibilities. But bishop g5 pinning the knight here. And Gukesh simply goes d6. Well, this move bishop g5 is a very committal move, because in a way you're putting the bishop here, putting pressure, but black can always go h6 g5 and kick the bishop away. Pawn to c3 by Nodirbek. He controls the central squares here, and maybe later wants to go for the d4 break. Gukesh taking his time here, takes 3 minutes and pushes his pawn to a6. These are useful moves. You know, one thing, if you notice Gukesh, what he's doing is he's not committing to short castles. He's actually keeping the options open. Knight bd2 played. And now the bishop comes back to a7. So just keeping on improving the position and asking Nodirbek if he wants to castle. Yes, he does. Short castle is on the board. And now Gukesh, I think h6. It's time to ask the question to the bishop. And while Nodirbek is super confident here, you can see the time on the clock, 1 hour 32 minutes. Gukesh has 1 hour 23 minutes. I think it makes a lot of sense to keep the bishop on h4. He plays it. He keeps the pin in the position. Bishop h4 played. And now Gukesh here goes bishop to g4. a4 played, taking space on the queen side. Bishop g4, very interesting choice by Gukesh actually. I was wondering if he went h3, maybe Gukesh would have kept this pin alive, because white has already castled. g4 is difficult. And now queen d7. A very interesting move. He's ready to take the double pawn so that he gets the g file. Also h3 can often be met with a sack here on h3. So goes b4 in the position. So b4 played here. And now knight to e7 played by black. So black puts his knight back on e7. And now you want to go g5, you want to go knight g6. So Nodirbek takes 27 minutes for this move and plays bishop g3. And his point is, if you go g5, he will break in the center with d4 and activate this bishop. That's very important. So Gukesh would have loved to play g5, would have loved to play knight g6, knight h5, knight f4, these ideas. But here he simply goes knight g6, places his knight on g6, adjusts his pieces and presses the clock. And now d4, much more difficult, because after takes, you win a pawn, and also the king is pretty safe. So this doesn't help white. Nodirbek puts his queen on c2. Well, he's come out of the pin now, and now d4 becomes an absolute reality. Gukesh comes back to the board, and here simply castles now. I think Gukesh simply likes his position here. It feels like he has all his pieces on the right squares. And for Nodirbek, perhaps it's time to strike in the center with d4, with his knight defending the pawn, the queen and the knight defending the other pawn. His center is stable enough to do this. Also, it helps his bishop to activate here. Knight h5 played. Very, very interesting move. If you try to win a pawn here, I will first take, pawn takes, and then take back here. And this would be a very, very pleasant position for black with the bishop pair. And so king h1 played. Now, king h1 in a way is a very, very subtle move. Firstly, you come out of this bishop's diagonal. Secondly, you want to play h3 so that, you know, bishop h3 takes, queen h3 can be met with bishop h2. And there are all these little points. But for now, Gukesh brings his rook to e8, defends the e5 pawn, and later would like to play f5. Nodirbek is going for the question. He asks the question to Gukesh, pawn to h3, and now taking here doesn't work so well. Bishop h2 and white is better here. So Gukesh plays bishop back to e6, and I like this move a lot because if you were to take here, I take back with the queen or even with the rook and then swing my rook over, and that is really nice. So bishop h2 played. He saves the bishop there, and now the knight can jump into f4. Yes, he jumps into f4, eyeing the g2 and the h3 pawns. The knight is very well positioned here. And Nodirbek calmly writing down the moves. Sometimes writing down the moves, you do it carefully. You're thinking about the position. You're thinking about your next moves. What are your ideas going to be? He takes on e6. Rook takes makes a lot of sense here. So does queen takes. I don't think pawn takes is something really great because after take, I don't know if Gukesh wants to voluntarily go into this structure. He takes back with the queen, which is a very logical move. And Gukesh does have some pressure in the position. Nodirbek brings his rook to the center of the board, rook e1. And now Gukesh, where is his next idea coming from? He goes queen f6. His pieces are menacingly closing in to the king here on h1. But Nodirbek pushes the pawn, and this one is such a committal move because he is opening up this entire bishop. White's own bishop is not so great on h2. It feels like Gukesh is already doing so well. Rook c8. What a beautiful move. The idea here is to play c6. You could have even done it directly, which was a nice move, but rook c8 is showing Nodirbek the cards that he wants to play pawn to c6. And now Nodirbek pushes the pawn to c4, trying to gain space. Maybe later push even c5 to block this bishop off. But first, it's Gukesh's turn to strike in the center. He goes c6. And now if takes here, he'll take back with the pawn or maybe even with the rook actually, putting pressure here. So Nodirbek goes queen b3, coming out of this rook's influence on the c file. And now Gukesh plays queen to e7. A calm move here. and pawn to a5, just clamping down the position of black with pawn to a5. And queen comes to d7. Now the queen is looking in this direction as well as here. There could be potential sacrifices here. Also pawn takes pawn, pawn takes pawn. Queen could jump out to b5. But what a move by Nodirbek. Amazing move. He goes knight g1. And his main point is he wants to trade this knight with knight e2. That's the thing about good players. They pull the brakes before it gets really bad. But b5, another interesting move played here by Gukesh. He's just trying to hack down this structure. A b6, bishop takes b6. And yes, while this does create a weakness on a6, there's also weakness on b4. For example, if you try and attack here, I can take, and then queen can jump to b5. So be not so easy there. Knight e2 played by Nodirbek, offering a trade of knights. And now knight takes on e2, rook takes e2 played. And black pushes the pawn to c5. Very nice move. The pawn comes forward. If you take, I'll take back with the bishop. If you push forward, my bishop will pop out from here. Yes, he plays pawn to b5. And now Gukesh shouldn't take here, because after pawn takes, the knight sits here with a very nice positional advantage. And the best move is rook a8. Slightly tricky move to find, but he finds it. Rook a8 on the board. So Gukesh has a very nice position now. And Nodirbek takes the pawn on a6. Rook takes on a6 taken. And he wants to get his rook double down the a file. f4 played, opening up on the other side of the board. And that is what Nodirbek is all about. He can't sit there doing nothing. There's also another idea of knight b1, knight a3, knight b5. But I think he preferred opening up the position. Gukesh takes on f4. And now, after bishop takes on f4, which he'll take, Gukesh has a very tough decision to make. Should he give up his great knight for the bishop? But then he can reroute his bishop this way, hopefully. But he decides to first play bishop d8 and to get bishop here, because he believes that this knight is more valuable than the bishop. And Nodirbek gets his bishop back. Now he keeps his pressure on the d6 pawn. The bishop does come to f6. Gukesh is not afraid of the exchange sack. His king remains safe here. It's not a problem. So knight to f3, stopping a piece from coming to e5, because what you don't want as black is this structure where you have given white a protected passer. So it's important for black to keep one more control on the e5 square. Rook f8 played, and the idea is to play rook to a3 next. He plays king to h2, moves his king up to the board. And now queen e7 played. And with the idea of knight e5. Whoa, Nodirbek is like, I'm not going to suffer this position by your piece sitting on e5. I'm giving up a pawn so that I get active play in return. And Gukesh chops off the pawn with his bishop first. Knight takes the bishop. And he takes here now with the knight. I think this would be the right move to continue with. Thinks for a bit and takes it with the knight. And here's the point now. If bishop takes e5, which is going to happen, I can take here, but I can even play f6, pinning down here. I don't know what this position is like because he can sack a rook, give a check. It can become quite dangerous, but Gukesh does not even get into this f6 business. He just takes on e5. D takes e5 played. The queen comes to g3, attacking the pawn on e5, and Gukesh has to defend it with pawn to f6. Yes, he pushes his pawn to f6. Now Gukesh is a pawn up. He has some pressure in the position. He is putting a lot of pressure on Nodirbek in terms of material, but Nodirbek has this piece activity. His queen is here. His rook is ready to enter the b file. His other rook is also ready to join in. He has this protected passer. So all in all, this is wonderful compensation for the missing pawn. Now rook a3 played by Gukesh, attacking the queen here on g3. And Nodirbek plays queen to g4. This queen looks very actively in this diagonal. Also, this pressure on the g7 pawn is intense. He goes rook a4, pinning the pawn here, putting pressure on the a4 point, on the c4 point from the a4 rook. And we have reached move 40. So both players will get 30 extra minutes on the clock. Nodirbek plays his rook to f6. He's aiming for rook e6, trying to attack here and here. And Gukesh comes back with a nice snack. I mean, this is a long game. They've been sitting here for last 3.5, 4 hours. Rook f8 played, trying to now execute the move f5, e4 in the center of the board. The queen comes here to e4, placing the queen here. And now the thing is, Gukesh, while he's pawn up, he doesn't have too many active things to do. So he decides to actually give up one of the pawns. He plays f5. And now Nodirbek can actually take the pawn on e4. So it's a very interesting decision by Gukesh to give up one of his pawns. But I think in return, he will get back the c4 pawn here. So queen takes queen. He takes rook takes e5. And now rook takes c4 played. The point is now you want to play rook d4, c4, c3, just push the pawn down the board. Rook e7. And now king to h7 played. Wants to maybe double down the 7th rank, and he does play rook b7. And this has to be brought rook to g8, rook c7. Now rook to e4 played. Oof, that's a nice move. Actually, looking at rook takes rook, pawn takes, and then rook c5, just trading the rooks. So Gukesh seems to be okay with a draw here. Takes, pawn takes. Nodirbek takes back the pawn on c5. And Gukesh plays his pawn to e3. Pawn to d6 played. Maybe wanting to get his rook here. If you play rook e8, there's pawn to d7. So rook d8 played. Plays rook to e5. And the players take the last pawns. Now 2 pawns each. Rook endgame. This is a draw. And Gukesh plays rook c6. He's not offering a draw, nor does Nodirbek. They both want to continue playing. The threefold repetition. That's how they want to do it. Rook f3. Rook d6. Maybe they could keep on doing this all day long. Rook e3. Look at Nodirbek. And Gukesh offers the, he says threefold repetition. And Nodirbek is ready with his king. He's like, I'm happy with a draw here. A draw between both the players. Big fight. But in the end, look at this. He mentions... And I think they are talking about the position when Gukesh had already this major piece endgame and extra pawn. And I think Gukesh wasn't happy with one of his moves and he thought he could have improved there. It's nice to see both of them analyzing together, talking to each other. I think that's always nice to see between these two youngsters who have this kind of rivalry, but I think they don't see it that way between them. They see themselves as competitors of the board, on the board, but off the board, just two guys who are really good at chess. And great to see this game. It was filled with a lot of ideas, a lot of interesting moments, but in the end, Nodirbek, who was under some pressure, found this very nice maneuver, knight g1, knight e2, and that, according to me, kind of saved everything for him.